Okay, you're live. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Town Council Budget Workshop for Thursday, May 27th. I will call the meeting to order, and if you will please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so this portion of the meeting is specifically set aside for comments from the public who are asked to limit their comments to 2 minutes. Any person interested in providing public comment should email publicmeetings@rockyhillct.gov or call 860-258-7682. You will be provided with a link to attend the Zoom remote meeting and instructions on how you will participate. And we will move right into budget review. Paragraph A, Board of Education, which is pages 92 and 93 of your budget books. And I would like to welcome our Board of Education members. I see Mr. Zettergren, and I don't know who Mr. Zettergren is sitting with.
Dr. Zito and Brian Dillon.
Okay, Dr. Zito and Brian Dillon, welcome. And so if you'd like to begin.
All right, I'd like to start tonight by thanking the council for all their support to the Rocky Hill Board of Education, its students and families. This has certainly been a trying year in light of the COVID pandemic. The board has greatly appreciated the support of the council as we have tried to maintain a safe and secure environment within the schools for the staff and students of Rocky Hill, while still allowing all families a choice of attending the school in person or remote. So I thank you for all the support that you've given to the Board of Ed over this past year. I know going forward, we're also going to have some questions as we continue to navigate through the pandemic and the outcome of what our next steps will be. Some of this is incorporated into the board's budget, and I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Zito as his PowerPoint to prepare. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Appreciate the opportunity to address our council tonight. Appreciate the fact that our board chairman could be here in person with us. I think I do see Lori Bosky on the screen. Is Jen Allison with us? Any other board members I've missed this evening? I can see Jen and Lori and others. If you're here, I appreciate your support tonight. Again, I thank the council for giving us some time to talk about this important process. So Ms. Listro is here to help us as well, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction. I'm going to take you through the slides. It's a very similar format to the one we use each year here in Rocky Hill. Here we go. Again, we have our board members, several of them with us this evening. I would ask that you allow me to get through the slides before we open it up to questions. We'll do our best to answer any questions you have this evening. And if there's a question that requires a little legwork on our part, we will make sure that we email those answers to John Muir with a copy to the mayor and the board members, and then John can distribute those responses to council members. And that again is if that's something we have to dig for in terms of information we may not have available this evening. Every year we start our budget process with 6 primary budget assumptions. We want to continue to provide our kids with a high quality and engaging curriculum. We always focus on constantly improving our teaching and learning processes within the schools. We take a very critical look at staffing levels to make sure that our staffing conforms with the board's class size guidelines. We allocate sufficient monies for instructional supplies. We also spend quite a bit of time reviewing our facilities and our equipment needs with the board. And number 6, really in light of what's going on with this pandemic, has really taken a major role and major amounts of our attention in terms of technology. The pandemic, throughout the year, we've seen the amount of in-person kids versus remote kids fluctuate. For quite a few months this year, we were almost a 50-50 district. That's district-wide in terms of the amount of kids in person versus kids on remote learning. Last week, I reported to the board that we're seeing an increase in in-person learning We're up to about 65% of the kids now coming to school for in-person instruction on a daily basis. I do want to thank our board, and I know the council knows this already, but for the public to understand as well, we are one of the few districts in Connecticut that's been open for in-person learning 5 days a week since the first day of school. And I really credit the board for that because they were very deliberate in that decision. We spent a lot of time last summer preparing to open our schools on time for in-person learning. And the feedback we're getting from our families that feel that that's been very important has been nothing short of phenomenal. They've been very appreciative of the board's efforts to keep our schools open for all the families that chose to avail themselves of that option. This budget does a couple of things. First of all, I mentioned the staffing guidelines. We follow those to a T. We want to keep class sizes reasonable. We cover our mandated special ed costs. We've got a number of contracts that are in the process of negotiation or were recently negotiated. The funding is in there for those contracts. We always include funding to support the curricula. In other words, the things the kids are learning in class every day. And we also spend some time reviewing our technology needs and again, ensuring that our facilities are safe and properly maintained for the students. This year, the overall increase is 3.75%. I'll break that down a little bit, but here are the factors that are driving the adopted budget. The salaries are a large portion of that. Health insurance costs have gone up a little bit, not terribly, but a little bit. We have some increases in property services and in the repairs and maintenance line items. And we noted an increase this year in technology, about $84,000, and I'll speak to that in a little more detail later on. One of the things we always discuss at these meetings, and we frequently discuss with our board as we're building the budget, is the enrollment. Our enrollment this year, you've got in front of you the October 1 numbers from a historical standpoint. And you can see that back in the school year 13-14, we had about 2,400 students in Rocky Hill, and we've come up quite a bit since then. I'll get into more detail there. We're not seeing the steep climb anymore, though, that we were noting for a number of years. I know for those of you that have been on the council for a while, we were growing at a pretty fast clip, and that was one of the reasons we needed to build Mosier School. Here are the exact numbers for the last two October 1 reports. October 1 of 2019, we had 2,697 kids. We saw a decrease this year of about 60. I was asked earlier today by some of my administrative team about this. We dug into the numbers a little bit. Our kindergarten cohort for the current school year is about 20 students lower than what we'd seen in previous years. I think some of that is related to the pandemic. The compulsory attendance age in Connecticut is actually age 7. So some families have chosen to keep kids home and delay kindergarten a year. We also have a number of students that are homeschooling this year, a little bit higher than usual. I think the number was around 30, Darlene, for homeschooling. So, that explains some of the decrease. But we also, we remain a very transient district. Just for comparison purposes, I ran today's enrollment in preparation for tonight. And you can compare that to the October 1, 2020 number. The enrollments remain stable this year. We're up by 6 kids compared to last October in terms of today's number. So we don't see much change there. I'll draw your attention to the bottom of the slide, which is interesting. And I'll take a few seconds to explain this. In the 2019-2020 school year, we had 291 students new to Rocky Hill that were not kindergarten students. So if you think about it, every year we have roughly 175 to 200 seniors who graduate, and we typically have a replacement cohort coming in into kindergarten of roughly 200 kids. What I like to look at is that number of students that are not in that kindergarten cohort to say how many new faces are actually coming into Rocky Hill each year. Last year it was 291. This year it's slowed a bit, it's 212. But because those overall numbers remain relatively stable, what that tells me is there's a relatively high rate of student transiency, roughly 200 to 300 kids coming in and probably a similar number leaving. This does present some challenges for us, but as you'll see in our high test scores, were able to deal with that challenge and still perform very well in terms of an academic metric. But I bring this to your attention because I still believe we are a town that experiences some level of transiency that we don't necessarily see in other Connecticut communities. When we look at our projected enrollments from the New England School Development Council, they are projecting that we're going to grow 95 kids on the pre-K through 12 basis over the next 2 years. I think facilities-wise, with the town's decision to build Mosier, we're well equipped to deal with any increase of that size. I'm not concerned about that number at all, but it is important to gauge that, and we report on this stuff every year to the board as well. So last year, the SAT test was not given because of the pandemic. The state also did not administer the Smarter Balance. So the one academic metric where we could compare Rocky Hill to other towns in our district reference group was on the advanced placement testing, which was administered. In this chart, you have a couple of columns. On the left-hand side, we take all of the towns in our district reference group. Those are all the towns where the Department of Education has determined they have a similar economic profile in terms of their ability to pay for education. So in terms of spending, we're 18th on a per pupil basis. So we're pretty efficient in terms of the dollars and how we spend them. And in terms of test scores, we were first out of 24 towns. And that's based on the one metric that we could use, which was the AP results. Just over 86% of our kids received a 3 or higher on the AP test. We're very pleased with these results. I think, again, even though we couldn't measure SAT or measure the Smarter Balance, on the one metric we could measure, shows we're doing very well from a competitive standpoint, preparing kids for college. The AP tests are very important. And again, Rocky Hill is in first place out of 24 towns, even though we're kind of low on the spending side, which, again, I take pride in that because it says we're being really efficient with the dollars here. Our staff is doing a great job moving the kids along. We do have some preliminary SAT data that we shared with the board. Now, again, this was an odd year. If you look at this chart, you'll see that there was no testing for 1920. So any comparisons we can do in-house based on this preliminary data is really from 2 years ago. And again, if you note the number of students who tested, there was a decline. As I said earlier, we have a significant number of kids who've been at home all year participating in the remote learning platform. So our test takers dropped a little because some of those kids simply didn't come in to take the SAT. But you'll see, compared to 2 years ago, we saw a nice bump of about 24 points in the reading and writing portion of the test and a 32-point bump in the math portion. So we find this encouraging. We never want to see the scores going down. So the fact that we've seen a little bit of a bump in those areas says a lot about the kids really and their resilience. And it says a lot about how hard the staff's been working to prepare these kids. And I think it puts our kids in a good situation in terms of college applications when we're doing this well on the SAT. Again, another chart of comparisons here. We are the most efficient community in the District Reference Group D in terms of special education expenditures. About 19% of the overall budget is devoted to special education. And you can see that does make us the most efficient. I'll credit the board, and I'll mention our Assistant Superintendent for Personnel and Student Services, Amy Stevenson. When she came in, one of the things the board asked her to do, she's been with us 4 years now, was to take a look at some of the kids who were being outplaced. And Brian, sitting here tonight, I'm going to give him the credit because he charged us at a board meeting a couple of years ago to investigate the feasibility of creating some in-district programming for kids. So we opened up the Pathways and Transitional Learning Academy. We're actually renting a facility over on New Britain Avenue, and it's going very well. That's helping us save some significant dollars in terms of outplacing kids and not having to pay tuition. We keep them right here in town. To me, what's even more important than saving the dollars is the fact that students who typically would have been sent to a facility outside of Rocky Hill are getting their educational experience right here in town. A lot of those kids in the 18 to 21 transitional program are also getting work experiences here in town with local businesses. So it's been nothing short of a fantastic decision by the board to give us the flexibility to create that program. And it's one of the factors that contributes to our good ranking here in terms of being very efficient with the special education dollars. So where are we on the budget in terms of an increase? The board adopted a budget of $48,205,000. You could see that the sheer dollar increase is about 1.7 million, and the percentage increase is 3.75%. So again, I mentioned some of these topics earlier, but if we break down that increase and look at the drivers, we kind of disaggregate the numbers here. So salaries, mostly contractual wage increases are driving the budget a little bit north of 2%. The benefit costs have gone up 0.58%. Property services are another 0.5% on that overall 3.75. Like I said, and we can break that out a little bit for you. On the property services, there are ice hockey rental fees. We're the host program this year. The board authorized us to move ahead and host the regional ice hockey program with 3 other towns, but we're the host school. So they contribute a little bit back to us, but rental fees are built into that number. We are renting that facility over on New Britain Avenue for those transitional and pathways special needs students. And then our equipment line item, our repairs line item went up a little bit. So that explains that 0.5% increase there. Equipment, that's primarily technology. And then we have some miscellaneous factors throughout the budget. And again, that's your breakdown of the 3.75% increase. We only have one new position this year that the board approved, and that's a human resources coordinator. That's not an administrative position. It's more of a secretarial, clerical support type position. One of the things we found out through the pandemic was the lack of a dedicated human resources department really created a lot of issues here. We were spending a lot of time dealing with many leave requests, staffing needs, large numbers of substitutes had to be hired. Contact tracing took on a major role. So midway through the year, Mr. Dillon had asked me to come to the board with a presentation. We took a look at all of the surrounding school districts. Every one of them had a dedicated human resources department. We don't have one here currently. The board did create one. We're moving forward with the hiring of one position, as I said. And what that's going to enable us to do is have a dedicated HR department at a very low cost. We've created a whole new department for the school board for the cost of about $70,000. So we think it's a win, but a necessary thing for us, particularly as we've faced these challenges throughout the year, and we look forward to future years. So in this pie chart that we put together, we just look at those data a little bit differently. It's just a different visual representation. But you could see, as you would find in most places, the salaries and benefits are the lion's share of the budget. Typically, salaries are about 2/3 of any school district's budget, right on the mark here at 67%. Benefits at 16%. So you're going to find in almost any school district budget you look at, 80 to 85% of the budget is typically donated to what I call the people costs, because it's a labor-intensive industry in terms of teaching and learning. And you can kind of see how those numbers break out. Transportation is another fairly large driver, $2.3 million. It's expensive to run the buses, but we're required to do it, and we want to do it in a safe and efficient manner. But this chart here gives you just another way of looking at the numbers in terms of how they break down in the board's budget. So I'll go through this one quickly. You've seen this before, but just to give you an idea of the efficiency in Rocky Hill. The most recent data that the state provides is from the 1920 school year. And you can see that the average town in Connecticut, statewide mean, was over $19,000 per child. In our district, it's $17,687 in our district reference group. And here in Rocky Hill, we're a little north of $16,000. So again, even to come up to the state or even the district reference group D average, we'd need another $8 million to come up to the state level. And as I say, I'm not asking this, I would never ask the board for this money, nor would we ask the town. But we do want to drive home the point that the taxpayers are getting an outstanding return here on their investment. As you saw in those AP scores, our students continue to produce very well academically. I credit our teachers and our support staff and our building leadership for that success. And really, I credit the board because they drive home the importance to us on a daily basis of how they want to see high test scores in Rocky Hill. They want to prepare our kids for success when they leave our school district, and I think we do a good job of that. The last 2 bullet points, you'll see that in terms of where we are statewide, out of the 169 school districts in the state, I said 166 districts, we're 139. So we're in the bottom 16% of spending. So again, we're doing great work on a very efficient basis. And in terms of the town's relative wealth, Rocky Hill is ranked 65 out of 169, which puts Rocky Hill in the 38th percentile in terms of relative wealth. So again, the message here is good results at an efficient cost. The next slide just kind of gives you some historical perspectives on where Rocky Hill has ranked on state spending compared to the statewide averages each year. And you'll see that going back to 04, 05, we've dropped a little bit. And again, I think if we're getting excellent results and we feel as a team that the needs of the kids are being met, I don't have a problem with that sliding backwards. I think it just speaks to our efficiency. Here again is another slide just showing where we rank on the spending without all the other data to distract, but you can see that within DIRG D, we are 18th in spending out of the 24 towns. So let's shift over a little bit to the capital improvement program. This is a separate allocation from the town council devoted to all the capital projects. This is kind of a useful chart for you as you deliberate on your final budget appropriations, but it shows you where the board's request came in blue each year and where the council appropriated the dollars. And there have been some reductions to the board's request, but I will also say this in fairness, we appreciate the council and the town manager working with us each year on any surplus monies. Typically, the board has been, very appreciative. We have a very transparent process. We return the surplus to the town, and the town's been very good about repurposing that money back into the school. So we think the overall relationship has been outstanding, and we really appreciate that. That's not the case in every community in our state. So we are very appreciative of that. But we wanted to give you kind of this visual history of where we are on the requests versus the appropriations. And we do have some pending infrastructure projects in our approved CIP. So the West Hill roof, you can see that it's 23 years old. The GMS roof, 27 years old. These are aging structures. Stevens needs new HVAC, $2.4 million. The two the West Hill HVAC and the GMS Science, I want to spend a second on. You approved as a council a couple of weeks ago phase 1 of the HVAC replacement project at West Hill School. That was $728,000. We're going to be using federal grant money to cover what I would call phase 1A, the second phase, which will start on July 1. We're optimistic, cautiously so, that $2.5 million number may be able to come down a little in terms of project completion. The other fact I want to mention is that with the GMS Science classrooms, the board just directed the administration to do a contract with Castle Booze to consider the possibility, instead of new construction, doing a full refurbishing in each classroom or a renovation within each classroom, which would essentially replace the classroom infrastructure, the chairs, science tables, cabinetry, and so forth. And that would give the board the option of upgrading those GMS Science classrooms without having to look at constructing a new wing on the building. Those are all decisions that the board will have to make once they look at the proposal that KBA comes back to us with. But I wanted to get out in front of that and just mention that since that was recent board action. One of the reasons why the board is focused on the middle school classrooms at GMS in science is because they're antiquated. I think they were last touched in 1995. So what happens is the students are getting modern science equipment at Mosier. They go into classrooms for 3 years at GMS that are pushing 30 years in age, and then they go to the recently finished high school. So there are 6 science rooms at that school, but I just want to draw your attention to that. It remains a priority for the board. So the overall cost on capital projects coming down the pike is closing in on 10 million. Although, as I said, there may be some savings on those last 2 bullet points, but very cautiously optimistic on that. Why do we need to have a CIP that's funded consistently by the town? Well, COVID really brought to light the importance of indoor air quality. We also want to maintain efficient systems in our buildings, and as those systems age, they lose efficiency and drive up utilities costs. We're very committed to maintaining safe, high-quality teaching and learning spaces. We want to make sure equipment is modern so we don't have damage based on leaks and equipment failures. And again, I commend the board for moving ahead with the HVAC project because, as we've discussed at a number of meetings, these systems are getting antiquated. A repair alone a couple of years ago at West Hill, the coils on a condenser were $38,000. There's a cost when you have to bring a crane out there. So every time the board has to authorize us to go out and make those repairs, they're expensive. And we think long-term, it's just much smarter, as the board reflected in its recent resolution, to put the modern equipment in and stop those short-term fixes. The CIP budget proposal from the board for next year was approved at $1.6 million. The project at West Hill, the first phase was $1.3 million. The classroom furniture, the board set aside $100,000 to replace 1 grade level per year. So they'll pick a grade level, and then they've got some miscellaneous projects, number of smaller projects throughout the district. So it's a fairly modest CIP, and I understand that there has been conversation about some reductions there with that grant money coming in that we plan to use to tie up the HVAC project at West Hill. Just to give you some recent highlights, despite the problem with the pandemic that everybody faced this year, we are Project Lead the Way High School for the 3rd year in a row. So that's the pre-engineering program at Rocky Hill High School. I think the town is aware of this, and the town should take pride, just like the board, that Castle Booze received an award for outstanding school design by the American School and University Magazine for the work they did at Mosier. So I know I'd shared this information with the board over the winter, and it's a pretty fantastic award. And again, that project was a home run for this community. As I noted earlier, we're one of the few districts in the state that remained open for 180 days of in-person instruction throughout this whole year, starting from day one. And our chairman is here, and he made it clear to me last summer, Mark, we need to go 180 days. We need to be open for our kids and our families. And this concept of hybrid, 2 days a week, 3 days at home, 2 weeks out, 2 weeks in, was not something we were interested in doing because we did not feel it was in the best interest of kids and families to do that. Our marching band placed 3rd in the Division I New England competition. And our ice hockey program, our fledgling program, first year that Rocky Hill hosted the collaborative ice hockey program with a couple of other area towns, won the 2021 CIA Sportsmanship Award. They avoided major penalties. So sportsmanship, well, fighting is a major penalty. Our kids played hard and they played tough, but they played clean hockey. So we were very pleased with that award as well. Just to give you an idea, the mission always remains preparing our kids for success when they move beyond the halls of Rocky Hill High School as they progress through our school system from pre-K all the way up. Our graduation cohort rate remains strong. It's a little bit down this year at 92.9%. And the specific reason for that is we have a number of kids in the 18 to 21 program that are still with us, and they need to be with us in that transitional program. That's for kids with significant disabilities. But that counts against us on the graduation rate because it's a 4-year adjusted cohort rate. With that being said, we're still well above the state average, and I've provided you just kind of a mishmash of different schools that the class of 2020 was admitted to last year. So again, you could see some very good New England schools on here. And then you've also got kind of a national profile as well. So we feel like the school system does a good job of preparing our kids to compete for these coveted slots at schools throughout the country. And the feedback we get when kids come back to town is that they feel like Rocky Hill put them in a good position to succeed when they leave us and they move on to the larger world. All right, let's talk about how much money we project returning to the town this year. We are projecting at this point $928,000 coming back to the town. We know that $728,000 is going to replenish the money you just authorized to start phase 1 of the West Hill HVAC project. We anticipate another $200,000. That's a very good estimate at this point, this late in the year, for a total return of $928,000. And this year, we are not asking that you hold any of it in the non-recurring account. We understand that there's needs on the town side. We're very pleased that you supported the HVAC project. And we know you probably have very good ideas in terms of how you need to use the additional $200,000 we plan to return to you. So one might ask, why such a large surplus? It's normally not this high. The reality is we didn't know what we were facing with COVID at the beginning of the year. So we put a hiring freeze in some areas. We didn't fill some positions. We held tight on that decision because we did have a large number of kids that were doing their learning on the remote basis. We do anticipate them all returning to school next year. We also accrued some limited savings in the transportation area. We also accrued some savings on supplies. Again, at one point, 50% of our kids were at home, so there were less supplies being used in the schools. The bottom line is that we have close to $1 million in our surplus. That's an atypical number, but I think it's an anomaly simply because of what happened with the pandemic and with the amount of families that kept their kids at home. So we're transparent about this, and we are pleased to return that amount to the town on June 30th. So from an overall numbers standpoint, again, our request is a little north of $48 million. Compared to last year's budget, we're up $1.7 million. It's a 3.75% increase, which is a fairly standard budget increase. That's where we are. And again, bottom line is we think we produce a really high quality product here for the taxpayers, which benefits the town as a whole, and we know you understand that. And while doing that, we do it at a below average cost, and we support the board's goal, which is to provide all of our kids with an outstanding education. So with that being said, I appreciate your patience as I work through the slides. And there's 4 of us in here tonight. We're happy to answer any questions you have, and you can direct them to Mr. Dillon if you like, or me or Chuck, however you want to handle it. And Darlene is here if you have any curricular questions or instruction questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zito. So I guess that means next year we can't pull up this anomaly slide of 928,000 and show it to you, right?
I think that's the right word. I think it's an anomaly because
Okay.
I can tell you this, that the state, and you know this, the governor's come out and said that there will be no mandate for remote learning. Mr. Dillon has spoken to me. He'll be scheduling a meeting with some key stakeholders in the next several weeks. He mentioned this at the last board meeting. And I think at a certain point, the board needs to formalize its stance, but it's not a requirement now. So my recommendation would be to come back. I'd have all the kids back. That's what I'd like to see, but it's really ultimately up to the board, and Brian needs to get input from the other board members as well.
Well, thank you. I just want, before we get into questions, I just want to commend you and the board, and obviously all of your staff and the teachers, on being the only school and the only school district that was continuously operating since day one. You provided a tremendous service for families who felt comfortable enough to send their children in, and that in and of itself is a testament to how much you care for the children and worked hard to ensure their safety during unprecedented times. But then you also provided an opportunity for remote learners. And I recently had a chance to brag about your efforts and your achievements on News Talk Radio, because I'm not aware of many other districts who have been able to accomplish what you have achieved. So we really want to congratulate you on that, and hopefully get the word out, because I don't think a lot of taxpayers recognize how difficult that was for you, and really what an achievement it is. So I just want to raise that point, because you certainly had a positive impact on the health and the well-being of many, many families. So thank you for that hard work. And with that, I will open it up to the council for questions. I'm going to go to Christoph.
I'm going to keep it to two.
Okay.
They're very different questions. The first one is related to one of the slides you showed about the, I think you said the transiency of the population, with the 200 kids on average coming in, about 200 leaving every year. And could you talk about the challenges, and I guess maybe the opportunity that's involved with, with that level of turnover for a relatively small district? What kind of challenges does that create for creating a sense of community cohesion and inclusion amongst the staff, I guess both the staff and the kids who are attending? Because that is a lot of change for them all to manage, and I wonder how that impacts the folks who might have different, who don't just grow up as part of the same consistent cohort as they travel through the system. Is there anything extra that we have to do to help make sure folks aren't getting left behind or isolated or anything like that?
Well, over the last couple of years, we've added, we've requested and the board's approved a couple of EL positions. Some of this EL is English language learner. So some of the transiency is related to kids from other parts of the world, primarily Southeast Asia. So they don't, some of the kids come in speaking very strong English, but others come in with needs because English is not their primary language. So again, I'll commend the board. Darlene advocated strongly. It was a database decision. And we have 2 EL teachers, which when I came to Rocky Hill 9 years ago, we did not have EL teachers. So that's probably the primary support that's been put in, Mr. Duff. With that being said, our staff they're used to this. We do a very good job with our enrollment coordinator, getting these kids in quickly, getting them acclimated, and making sure that they get up to speed as quickly as possible. And you see that reflected typically in our standardized test scores. So I think that the main support would be the EL positions that we've added over the last couple of years. And we seem to be in a good place to be able to handle this. We're used to it at this point.
And thank you. And then my second question was related to the CIP. It looked like, for the next, I don't know if it's next number of years or just the number of projects, about 5 or so projects. They're all between, around 1.5 and $2 million or so. I think the ballpark number, even though you mentioned they could go down, was around 9.8. Is that something where we feel that once we get through those, it's kind of a temporary hump, or are there more things coming down the road? Because, one of my questions, or I guess concerns, is, to fund this out of the operating budget, our taxes have to go up. And usually when the government raises your taxes, they don't go back down. So is it something where you consider potentially bundling it all as a part of an upcoming referendum to see if voters would prefer funding it that way, instead of understanding that we've all been through enough referendums, but with rates being relatively cheap, maybe it's a way to take the pressure off the mill rate? Or do you think this is the new, closer to being the new normal, or once these 5 or so projects roll off, we're going to be looking at, another several, coming up in the years after that?
I'll answer that, Mr. Duff. I think one of the things the board has done over the past 2 or 3 years is develop a CIP, so there's a consistent plan for what we would call the next 8 to 10 years worth of projects. So the $10 million that are listed here as pending infrastructure projects are spread out over the next 8 to 10 years in the CIP. Ultimately, it's the board's responsibility to identify and plan for these projects. I will then defer to the council as to whether or not it's more appropriate to fund those through either annual budget allocations or a potential referendum. That's really not the board's charge. I think that's the council's decision. The one thing I think it's important that the Board of Education does is continue to lay out a plan and identify these projects for the council. I will say that after these projects roll off the CIP and 8 to 10 years from now, you're going to have to start talking about the eventual replacement of a new roof at the high school. You're going to be nearing 20 years at that point. So, roofs and mechanical systems have about a 20 to 25 year life expectancy. I think it's important that the Board of Education continues to lay out a plan to potentially fund these projects as time goes on.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question, Madam Mayor. So there are two questions. The first one is really about the academic side of things, which is really for Dr. Zito, I guess, is I know like the outcomes look great, Dr. Zito, and I've talked about those outcomes in our meetings as well at the council side of things. But when you look at it from your perspective, from the perspective of getting better, not just maintaining where we are, our position, what are the opportunities you see in terms of what can we do better? If you had unlimited, let's not say unlimited, but let's say if you had like $2 million, like let's say, right? So for example, are there any courses which we don't offer today you would like to offer? Not just looking at our peer group, but looking at towns like Glastonbury or Avon or one of those towns which are on the top tier of the state, right, in terms of their outcomes. So that's the academic question, and then I will ask my second question later, if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll respond to that, and I'll invite Darlene to chime in as well, since she's our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. But you asked a question that has a lot of things that jump to mind right away. So one area we touched upon already where we could improve would be getting those science classrooms up to a modern state. At the middle school, they're 25 years old. They're past kind of their useful life in a sense. So we need to, I commend the board for putting that into the CIP and making that a priority. We want those kids to have the best possible experience in terms of lab science work at the middle school. In terms of courses, we have worked very hard over the last couple of years to take a look at what we offer at the high school. One of the problems we have, we're a comprehensive high school, but we're relatively small. We serve about 730 kids. So when you get into trying to add additional courses, there's only so many kids in the school, so they start coming out of other classes. So you create this kind of an inefficiency. Does that make sense to you? Whereas if you had a school with 2,000 kids, Glastonbury High School, for example, they're able to offer sometimes more classes because it's an economy of scale concept where you just have more students to fill those classes. With that being said, if you really pressed me, I'd probably talk about the tier 2 and tier 3 instruction at the elementary levels. That's where we know we have some kids that have some targeted needs, and we're always trying to provide them as much support as possible. But that's an area down the road, maybe we could even increase support for those kids. But from an overall standpoint, my view is that, we're doing really well. I'm pleased with the direction we're moving in. There are requests occasionally for different things. We offer Spanish, French, and Latin at the high school. We tried Italian. It was popular for a year or two, and the numbers didn't support it. So, there's been conversations in the past about Mandarin Chinese. We've also had conversations about making some changes potentially down the road at the middle school to offer Algebra 1 and geometry at the school. Right now, we have some very high-performing kids in 8th grade who go to the high school for their geometry class. So that's some tinkering we might do down the road. If you're asking me about where we could refine things to get even better. Those are my initial thoughts, but I would invite Ms. Lister to jump in.
I agree. You've touched upon the major headings. I do think we work actively with the curriculum committee for the Board of Ed, and we're always looking at updating our curriculum, bringing in new programs, and most recently, looking at revamping some of our high school courses to make them more updated. Yeah, I agree.
Great. No, thank you for that. And my second question is more about the budget and the ARP, right? Can you talk a little bit about like what the guidance for the ARP or lack thereof, or wherever it is now? In context of that, where do you stand in terms of what you presented today in terms of numbers? Is there anything which will move here or stay put, or like, you know, if you want to talk a little bit about the numbers in context of that ARP guidance?
Grant, are you referring to, sir?
The American Rescue Plan, the federal dollars.
Okay, so we have 3 grants, really 4. And I'll give you the numbers on them. We had a coronavirus relief fund grant that came in, about $219,000. There was an ESSER grant, federal grant, sorry, $121,000. Another ESSER grant of $862,000. And the ARP, if you're referring specifically to that, we're in the process of putting together an application that's not due until August for that next batch of federal dollars. That's got some specific conditions. We have to set aside about 20% for learning loss. We are looking at a relatively small number of high school juniors who slipped a little bit due to the pandemic. We want to make sure that they accrue sufficient credits to graduate on time. We also are looking at some health and safety needs, like with our nursing staff, and some other needs that are related primarily to technology staffing. So the ARP funds, again, we won't have an application that won't be into the state until August, and that'll be reviewed by the board in terms of where we earmark that money. But it's about $900,000, and that's a 2-year grant. So that's specific to your question on ARP.
Thank you, Dr. Zito.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Madam Mayor, if I could follow up on the questions regarding the funding a little bit. Dr. Zito, just to clarify a few, because I know these grants wrap over a couple of years. I believe there's some ECS funding for about $403,000. I'm not sure. The ERISA grant is also, I think, over 2 years. And the coronavirus, I think I'm pretty clear on.
So let me start with that, Mr. Greenspan. I know that the coronavirus relief grant, we had already submitted a resolution to the council asking for that money to be programmed. So I think everyone's okay with that. The ESSER grant was then used for, as Dr. Zito said, technical supplies, furniture, and Chromebooks. So that was extinguished. The ESSER 2 grant, we were proposing to have our CIP reduced and have those funds potentially utilized towards the West Hill HVAC project. Right now, we're asking for $1.6 million. Our understanding is that there's been discussions that our CIP could potentially be cut in half based on the incoming ESSER 2 grant, because those funds are available for the West Hill infrastructure project.
Okay, and then the ECS funding, which I think 403 was an additional amount, I believe you're receiving this year. And I'm not sure if it's this year, next year, but I'm not sure if it's been counted in the budget.
Yeah.
The district receives an excess cost grant. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. That's used to offset our special ed tuition costs. So that's we budget our tuition costs from a net basis. So when those monies come in from the board, that gets applied to our tuition line item.
The ECS grant is a grant the town receives.
Right, but
That's
that's,
an educational cost sharing. So we'll make sure you have the right terminology. Now, I know it's like alphabet soup with all these grants.
right,
But there's an excess cost for special education. I write about that in the narrative. And that's specific to high needs, high expense students. That comes to the district to offset the cost. Once we exceed 4.5 times the per pupil charge, we typically get about 70% of the delta back. So in layman's terms, if you have our per pupil 4.5 time number is about 68,000. If you have a $200,000 outplaced student, you get about 70% of that delta, about that 130 back. Does that make sense? That's for the special ed cost. When you use the term ECS, that's educational cost sharing, that's based on the number of students in the district. And that's a grant that goes straight to the town to support your appropriation.
I think that's over 4 million.
But wasn't, it is the ECS I'm referring to. I believe under the governor's proposal that we received more this year than we had in the prior year.
Yes,
And that came, I think, after the budget was done, and I'm not positive on that, so I'm kind of asking the question.
yeah, that money goes to the town.
Okay. All right, we'll have to look on the town side to see how that money's been allocated then in the budget.
Is that it, Counselor Greenspan?
That's it for me. I don't know if John Mayer wanted to jump in and say if we've accounted for it yet within our budget.
I didn't know whether you were finished questioning. No, we get the three payments associated from the ECS grant throughout the year, and it's part of our total revenue that the town uses to balance its budget. And theoretically, that money is going towards offsetting the cost of the education that the state provides the towns. So I don't think it increased at all in the current year budget. It did?
I believe it was the 21-22 budget that we were receiving additional funds. Maybe I'm off base, but I'll double check my notes on it.
Yeah, I believe I read that too.
And over time, the town has received additional funds. The state took a look at towns that were, according to their formula, historically underfunded, and Rocky Hill was one of those towns. So the town of Rocky Hill did receive additional revenue from that grant when that was reallocated.
No, let's get the year straight. In the next year's budget, we're getting more money in ECS from the legislature than what the governor proposed. Plus the legislature's increasing pilot money also. So we're getting increased revenues from the legislature over what the governor proposed for the 21-22 budget. As far as 2021, I don't think we got any additional money. We got the same amount of money that the governor or the legislature proposed for this current year budget. But next year, we're getting an increase in ECS of the balance 400,000, but that's related to the state legislature increasing that dollar amount.
But John, I guess the real simple question I guess I'm trying to ask, have we accounted for that in our budget, or did that come after the budget book was released?
It came after the budget book was released.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm all set.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Dr. Zito, thank you again for your presentation. You know, over the past years, I've been an ardent supporter, and you can't argue with data. But relating to the data, the test scores, is that, I keep on forgetting, is that elementary and junior high, or does that include the high school also?
The scores I showed this year For the advanced placement scores, that's only high school kids. We did not administer state testing last year. The state canceled the SAT and the SBAC, which is a smarter balance for the grades 3 through 8.
Okay, thanks. And just as a side note, the budget book is not on the website. Do you know who posts that on the website?
No, it is there.
It is there?
Yeah. We did get that question. But I forget
So it's been more
exactly how
recent.
to tell you to, I can send you actually where it is under there, but I don't remember off the top of my head how to give you that
Yeah,
direction.
I looked 2 weeks ago, and there was the prior budget from last year, but not this one. So maybe it's a more recent addition. Dr. Zito, how many assistant superintendents do you have?
We have 2, and we have an interim, so 3 total.
Are similar school districts, do they have 3? Or do they have an equivalent to like a director of a certain department?
A lot of school districts have an assistant superintendent for personnel, not all of them. Newington does, for example. So it depends from town to town. It would be a title change for our former director of special ed. Slight raise, but no new administrative position.
Okay. Just a question on process for HR. How is a teacher hired today? What's the process? Who do they interview with? Is it strictly within the school district?
Yes. So the process requires that the candidate apply online. The principal typically reviews the applications. We often have a hiring committee. We'll work through the applications, conduct a series of interviews, and then the successful candidate for a teaching position also has a final interview with me. So multiple interviews.
Okay, so there's no touch point with Dana McGee's office in the town side. It's strictly within the school.
There's no interaction with the town at all on our hires.
Okay. And I bring this up every year, the sharing of services. Have you seen any effort, any improvement with any sharing of services, whether it's IT collaboration or custodial or anything like that?
I know that in the area of facilities, we historically have had a really good relationship in terms of Park and Rec. The board, Park and Rec uses our facilities for a lot of their programming. The Park and Rec guys, Walt Sykes, Craig Bowman, do a great job helping us prep our fields and maintain our fields. There's a good relationship, in my opinion, with the town facilities staff, with Phil on the town side and Ron LaMontagne, our facilities director. We've helped each other out quite a bit with our HVAC technician. Sometimes we'll work on town projects. Sometimes the town electrician will assist us. So there's good overlap there. Again, I think we're really efficient. I don't know, to be honest with you, where else we would want to combine services to gain efficiencies. Combining services in IT, for example, wouldn't reduce the number of IT people. We have a lot of end users. We have a significant number of end users if you look at our students and our staff. So for IT, for example, even combining with the town, I'm not sure there'd be any reduction in staff that would accrue any savings. Obviously, the police and fire departments are not something where we would overlap in terms of education. So I think, those areas I mentioned are probably working well. I know we are now using one broker for health insurance, correct, Chuck?
Yes.
So that's another area where we've seen some modest savings in terms of using one broker. Previously, we had 2 health insurance brokers, so we did save some dollars in that area. But we're open to any ideas or feedback you may have on that.
Well, some other areas are in regards to our workers' comp liability insurances. Basically, that's combined.
And the pension management system too for the non-teachers.
Right. So those areas are combined. So from a volume standpoint and just from an administrative standpoint. John's staff handles that on behalf of the Board of Ed. So, those things are combined services, if you will.
Okay, thanks. Alan, thank you for asking the questions about the grants and ECS and some of that. Those were some of my questions. One of my favorite topics, of course, is health insurance. The towns been seeing some substantial savings on the health insurance because of the high deductible plan. Why aren't you seeing the same on the board side, the school side, with younger people?
I think if you look at us on an overall basis over a length of time, I think that we were well below the industry standard for what rates have increased each and every year. So I think we have had some savings. We've also been on the HSA or 401 HSA plan for a lot longer. So when we did go to that plan initially, and over the first couple of years, we did see substantial savings. Those savings probably have somewhat flattened out, but at least from my standpoint and my knowledge of the health insurance industry, they say every 5 years you're going to see a blip. And to be honest with you, we have, but I think in one of those years we went up more than anticipated, but we really haven't had one of those horrendous years, I guess you could say. So I think our rates have, while we've seen some increases, I think we've been well below the industry standard.
Chuck, have you looked at some of the union plans, the town plan that the unions are buying into on the town side?
I know you guys, I haven't looked at the details of them. I know that you guys that have just fairly recently started the implementation of the HSA plan and, have bargained that into some of your contracts and are in the process of expanding it, but I haven't looked at the detail of your plans.
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much, guys.
And Mr. Emanuel, just for you, I did find the budget. If you go to rockyhillps.com, under the Board of Education tab, there's another tab for budgets, and the current budget is there.
Okay. All right, thanks, Brian.
You're welcome. Yep, I just found it, yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I just have one question. I believe Dr. you said during your presentation that there were some positions that were not filled for the 2021 school year. Does the budget part of the salary part of the budget for 21-22 include filling any of those positions?
Yes, they're not new positions. They contributed to the spike in the current surplus. For example, we had a social worker this year who took a leave of absence, and we chose, when we looked at the number of remote students, we made a decision not to fill that position for 1 year, but it is in the budget for next year. We do anticipate filling that. We had another teacher resign midway through the year, and we used a substitute to cover that class, but we need to get a permanent teacher in there for the fall. So these are some things that I did early on in consultation with the board, because we really didn't know what we were facing with this pandemic. So we tightened our belts. And again, with a significant number of students participating remotely in their education this year, we were able to hold tight on those positions, which again is why you see a larger than normal surplus. That's one of the factors. But the short answer to your question is we plan on replacing those people.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anyone else?
Hey, Dr. Zito, this is John. Thank you for the presentation. Thanks everyone for that. The question I had is just very quick, more of a clarification. I believe you mentioned that the kids coming in equal with the kids coming out, the volume, but you said something about that there was some challenges posed around that. Did I hear that correctly? And if so,
I was asked about, I think Mr. Duff asked me about the challenges with that in migration and out migration pattern. And because we do have about 33% of our kids are of Asian descent on our demographic profile. And a lot of those students do come primarily from India. So one of the challenges with the in-migration that I talked about earlier was when we see students coming in from other parts of the world, they don't always have full mastery of the English language. So what the board's done over the last couple of years is they have authorized us to hire 2 full-time English language instructors. So those are teachers that work specifically with students that need to grasp the language. So that's probably the biggest challenge. But with the addition of those 2 spots over the last couple of years, we've been able to meet that need, and those kids are doing really well. So that is a bit of a challenge, but like I said, I think our teachers, our principals, they've grown accustomed to that, and we're handling that challenge well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the presentation and for attending tonight's budget workshop. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.